In the 1920s, guitar players had a real problem. Nobody could hear them. Stuck in jazz bands, people were playing acoustic guitars or mechanically amplified acoustic guitars that used resonators to try and make the sound of the guitar a little louder. But it wasn't enough. A man named George Beauchamp was working on an idea that he had for an electric guitar, a guitar that could be loud enough that it could be heard above jazz combos and orchestras of the day. And he had been working on a magnetic pickup that was also based on the principles of electromagnetism. And the idea is pretty simple. The pickup he finally developed worked by stringing the guitar with metal strings. If you then had these metal strings vibrate over a magnet that was wrapped in a wire coil, that coil would generate a signal that was directly analogous to the vibration of the string. Beauchamp finally got a pickup working to his satisfaction and called one of his buddies, one Harry Watson, who was a skilled wood craftsman. And he had Watson carve up with a rasp and a file and other hand tools the first little tiny electric guitar. It was nicknamed the frying pan because it looked like a frying pan. Anxious to manufacture it, he enlisted the help of his friend Adolf Rickenbacher. Now, Rickenbacher was notable for two reasons. One is that he was the cousin of famous World War I flying ace Eddie Rickenbacher, and number two, he was a tool and die man, which meant he knew how to make tools that made things. With Beauchamp's idea and Rickenbacher's name and connections, they were able to raise enough money to start a company that would eventually be known as the Electro String Company, and their product was going to be electric guitars. They decided to call the guitars Rickenbackers because they wanted to leverage the fame of Cousin Eddie's name and because it was much easier to pronounce than Beauchamp. They rolled out these first electric guitars but had several obstacles. The year that they brought them out was the middle of the Depression. It was 1931. Another problem was that musicians hadn't seen these electric guitars before. They didn't really understand them. What do you mean? It's a guitar I got to plug in? I have to get this amplifier thing to go with it so people can hear it? I don't get it. It doesn't sound like an acoustic guitar. Blah, blah, blah. The patent office was confused. Was this thing an electrical device or was it a musical instrument? At the time, there was no category that fit both of them in. And the downside to this is that other manufacturers took advantage of the patent office confusion and quickly rushed out their own knockoffs of the Rickenbacker to market. By 1935, the Rickenbacker Company had given up all hope against litigating claims against all of the companies that were producing knockoff electric guitars. Besides, by 1935, they thought they pretty much had it dialed in. They had a model that was a solid body that did a fantastic job of rejecting the feedback that was plaguing other manufacturers' big, hollow-bodied guitars. They also made amplifiers because the guitars only worked with them, and they thought this was a great hook. It's like, we'll sell you an electric guitar. Oh, and by the way, you need to buy this amp also, otherwise it's not going to work. One of the guys who used to work on the amps in his repair shop was named Leo Fender. And Fender noticed so many of these amps were coming in that there must be some sort of business he'd get into, and he started developing his own guitars. And if that's not proof enough as to how influential these early Rickenbacker guitars were, perhaps this will. Another guy who owned one of the first Ricks to come off the assembly line was named Les Paul. But these are basically electrified versions of old instruments. What about something really new? An instrument that wasn't built on a keyboard or a guitar, the way that the Telharmonium and Hammond organ and electric guitar were. What about something truly of the 20th century? The answer would come from Russia. August 5th, 1920, a young scientist named Leon Theremin demonstrates an instrument that he calls the Theremin. And it works something like this. Woo! Woo! The Theremin worked by waving your hands in space. What Theremin had done is built a box about this big out of wood. And inside this box was kind of a radio. And it had two antennas coming out. There was a loop around like this, and one that went straight up and down. And you controlled the pitch by moving your hand in space near this antenna. And the further away you got, the higher the pitch went. The lower down you got, the lower it went. Whereas this hand controlled volume. So it would get louder and louder and louder, and then if you touched, it was complete silence. So by waving your hands in the air, you could produce sound. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. Theremin took it around Russia in the early 20s. He showed it to Lenin, who thought it was such a brilliant example of true Russian genius that he sent Theremin off to New York and around the world to demonstrate it to everybody, so everyone would understand the genius of the Soviet Union. The other thing that not many people know about is that Lenin had also been recruited by the precursors to the KGB. These guys were known as the NKVD. And their mission was, look, Theremin, great, go show this crazy instrument to whoever you want, but you got to do a little spying for us on the side. Well, Theremin goes to New York, and he loves it there. He has a great time. He gets married. His instrument's going to get built by the RCA Corporation. He finds a young ingenue, this beautiful young woman who happens to be brilliant at playing the theremin, and everything's going good for him. But he's not doing such a good job of spying. So he was kidnapped off the streets of the Big Apple by the NKVD and dragged back to the Soviet Union. He spent World War II working on radar and an electronic listening device that he dubbed the Bug. And for that scientific achievement, he was awarded the Stalin Prize of 100,000 rubles. Theremin's instrument was fascinating to composers. This was sound you made in a totally new fashion simply by waving your hands. What could be more space-age or more modern than that? But there's a couple clear problems here. Nobody knows how to play this thing, and it's hard. With a piano, all I have to do is go over and hit a key, and the note comes out. But with the theremin, it actually depends on where my hands are and where my body is in relation to the instrument. So if I'm standing this close to the theremin, this might be an A. But if I'm standing just a little bit farther away, the whole thing shifts around. Learning to play the theremin is incredibly demanding and complicated, and there are very few people who have both the discipline and the patience to master it, and this ultimately doomed the instrument. But you've heard it. You've heard it on hits like the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations in the background, played rather sloppily, but there nonetheless. And countless sci-fi movies in the 50s used it to create weird, creepy space alien sounds. The theremin became a part of popular culture, but is today regarded as something of a musical novelty, primarily because it's so difficult to learn how to play. When played properly, it's beautiful and haunting with a sound that's somewhere between a cello and a human voice. Theremin's instrument is extraordinarily important, but it represents several of the issues that people have with new instruments. New instruments demand new music. It was difficult to write new music for the theremin because there were so few people that knew how to play it. Electrified versions of old instruments are actually new instruments. An electric guitar is extraordinarily different than an acoustic guitar. Ask anyone who's played both, and they'll tell you. Just like a Hammond organ is very different from a piano. Yes, they both have keyboards, but they offer exciting new possibilities that can only be fully explored by writing new music specifically for those instruments. New instruments also require virtuoso performers to play them, and unless the new instruments offer clear advantages over existing ones, you're going to be very hard-pressed to find a consistent stable of musicians willing to work up and spend the years required to become truly proficient on any instrument. This is one reason why not very many truly new instruments are ever developed. But developing new instruments is one of the only ways to keep dragging music forward in the 20th century.